to gather the ahas of tech use then right now as we head back into classrooms that we hope will remain face-to-face, that we may bring technologies back into, but regardless, we're going to be bringing back deep ahas about equity-oriented tech use. That might mean our urgent goals for supporting young people. That might mean realizations about opportunities denied that we know must be provided. That might mean realizations about subpopulations that we've realized benefit from particular strategies, but it's a particular urgent attention to the pros and cons of what we're doing, in this case, with technology. So we are very excited to have these small dialogues. We're recording them so that we can share ahas with many more educators after the fact. We're thrilled that you joined us today, and we'll be engaging you throughout in this kind of pro and con thinking about our tech use and how smart it is or isn't. And right now I'm going to turn it over to Courtney, who will introduce herself and bring in this crucial equity issue of student voice and how to create space for it. Courtney?
Good afternoon, everyone. Let me jump in and share my screen. Ooh, I'm not a Zoom teacher. Give me a second. There we go. Well, maybe this is one. All right. All right, thank you all for coming. I think most of us are back in session. So, you know, after a long day in the classroom and then rushing off to attend something like this, we appreciate you being here. I'll do my best to keep an eye on the chat as things go, but I think Mica and Kim will also kind of, you know, alert me to any questions you might have. So feel free to jump in and use the chat as you see fit, and we'll leave space for a little discussion at the very end. I'm really focusing today on how my experience in this last year has helped me rethink how discussion can look through the use of tech when we are remotely and online, and then also what takeaways I have for how that can look as we ease back into the classroom. Although I'm fully eased, we're giving out grades this week and we're 6 weeks in, so we're all at our different pace, right? So just to quickly introduce myself, my name is Courtney Kleffman. My pronouns are she, her. And I currently teach at Otay Ranch High School. I'm teaching English 11 co-teach and honors and a section of AP English language, but for the purposes of the work where we were taking notes and doing all of this in-depth study, I was teaching English 9 co-teach and English 10 accelerated. So, you know, back in the classroom, shifting everything I teach. That's what we do, right? I am also a writing project fellow. So I get to do a lot of work with Kim in the San Diego Area Writing Project and a Sweetwater induction mentor. So I get to work with new teachers frequently as well. My information is here if you'd like to reach out and ask me questions or get into contact about what I do. And I will share my slides with you at the very end so you have resources and things to look at as well. Just to introduce a little bit about my context, Otay Ranch High School is in Sweetwater Union High School District. We are kind of like the most southwesterly district. And this is kind of a little bit about us, right? So we have a large Latinx population. We have a small portion Asian population, and then I included some other populations as well, and I'll speak to that in just a moment. We have about a 36% free and reduced lunch group of students on our campus. And then I mentioned that in my particular classes last year, I had about 28% students with disabilities. With my co-teacher, we worked together. And I mentioned these things in particular because, of course, these last 2 years have been a WASC year for our school site. And it's had us taking a moment to stop, self-assess, and think about areas of growth. One of those areas of growth on our particular school site has to do with creating a culture of belonging. And 2 subgroups that have popped up in conversation in what we're seeing have to do with our students with disabilities, which I teach a large population of, and our Black student population as well. So I'll try to speak a little bit to maybe some of those subgroups as I share with what I'm doing. As I was preparing for this, I was looking back at the introduction to Mica's school talk and thinking about the framework that she uses to kind of consider what she does in the book. And this Alice Walker quote popped up and I was reminded of it, this idea of looking closely at what we do in the classroom and how it can help us dream about what the future can look like, right? And it connected with what we happened to be studying last year with the writing project, Gholdy Muhammad's Cultivating Genius. In her introduction, she talks about 19th century Black literary societies. And in particular, this idea of literary presence in the classroom stood out to me. What she says about literary presence is that it's a means of staking a claim and making oneself visible within the intellectual community through acts of literacy. Black people did not wish to merely exist in the country. They wanted to exert their presence and make their mark on history and telling their own narratives. And so I'm asking myself, as we're going to this pandemic year of online teaching, how am I setting students up to engage in ways that are both productive and empowering at the same time? And, you know, we all wore multiple hats last year, but for me, I was balancing being kind of first grade mom at home teacher's aide, because that's what we all became, right, for our little ones at home. And then also 9th and 10th grade English teacher. And I noticed a couple of things. On the teacher end, I saw how easy it was to slide into kind of like direct teacher instruction mode. We only had 45 minutes that we were allowed to be synchronous with our students out of the block. And so it was kind of, it goes by fast. And so you want to kind of control it sometimes, or you want, you know, like there's this easy way you can just kind of like have it be between you and the one student, as opposed to finding ways to create some interaction, which is a little challenging. And then I also noticed in my hovering, how can I help mom mode, that my son as a little 7-year-old was sitting on the end kind of like missing his peers, right? Like wanting interaction, and we're all stuck at home as well. So that definitely kind of drove and influenced as I was thinking about my equity vision and what it is that matters to me in the classroom. I'm asking myself, how can I re-envision this experience for my students and create a discourse community in an online context? And so my goal, my equity vision, really was to decenter myself as kind of the center of the discussion, as the orchestrator, and become more of a facilitator of student interaction. And so I was really hoping to see like more simultaneous interaction, equal participation, instead of just a student at a time or a teacher-student kind of dialogue happening. And so I envisioned that as students sharing their voice and giving them opportunities to be exposed to diverse ideas and perspectives as well, as they develop that literary presence that Gholdy Muhammad talks about. So my question that really drove my practice here is, how do I create a space for all students to be heard and to listen openly in a distance learning context? The particular urgency being that I really wanted to get students out of that kind of like teacher-student communication, like don't just, you know, always be submitting one thing to me, and more so that they're interacting with the thinking and ideas of their peers. So in order to make that happen, I realized that there are a couple of habits of mind that I'm trying to foster here. Open-mindedness is really important to me. It's something I want to see in the future of our country. And so, you know, as my students leave and become full-fledged, you know, adults and developing humans, you know, how are they becoming open-minded, flexible, and curious about other people's experiences and ideas? And in order to make that happen, it became my goal to start planning discussion structures and interactions that would give my students kind of space to share themselves, but also to hear the perspectives and ideas of others. I wanted to offer students the option to be heard without speaking, because not all students feel comfortable raising their hand or unmuting all the time, to listen to the ideas and, like I said, perspectives of other people, and then to create a space for students to engage in thinking about their own thinking, right? Now that I've heard other ideas, revisit my own thinking and consider how it's changed. And so that's where the tech platform comes in, right? We're all faced with this moment where we have to make a decision about where do we make this happen, right? And so that decision-making process sometimes can be overwhelming, but I found that really knowing my purpose helped me make intentional choices about which platforms would work best. And so, you know, one option is very simple, right? We have a chat in our function, our meeting here, that functions very well. One way I can do that is to offer students, you know, a question they can type into the chat and see each other's ideas. I found that a bit limiting though, right? So sometimes I found that what students wrote into the chat happened to be things like, one-word answers, abbreviations. It was a little more casual feeling in nature. And so I thought a little bit more, right? There's so many other options. I'm pretty good at Jamboard. I like Google Classroom questions. But when I really thought about my equity vision, and considering the fact that I want all student voices to be shared simultaneously. That's possible in the chat. However, it doesn't have the option of anonymity, because once we're logged in, all of our names show up, especially in Google Meet. You can't take your name away. So this idea of being able to support or amplify marginalized voices without necessarily calling them out or making them put themselves on display was really important to me. I was thinking about ways that interaction of ideas could occur. And in the chat, that's hard, right? Like you can at someone, but sometimes it goes fast and it's hard to catch up and go back to the idea. So as I'm deciding like, okay, which platform would work for me, I'm starting to realize like, okay, the chat's not it. Maybe something like Padlet could be. So as I'm thinking about Padlet, I know, I find it very easily accessible for all students, regardless of device. So if all they have is a phone, you can jump onto a Padlet and you can contribute. Even if you don't have an account. The interactions of ideas are actually pretty seamless. You can reply to someone, you can comment on someone else's. It's almost social media-like in nature, in the way that they display and sometimes pile up. And then students, like this last, bubble mentions, can see and listen to each other's ideas and perspectives without it moving too fast. You can scroll back and you can look. The anonymity aspect of it is also kind of a draw for me, in that if you're not logged in, you are anonymous and you can put your name on a particular post. And so as I'm thinking through which tech platform should I choose for my particular needs, I started leaning more and more toward Padlet. So what I have for you is a Padlet that I would like you to jump into with me, just so you can kind of see what it looks like on the student end of things. So let me grab this link. Now I lost my chat bubble. Link that you can click on. And when you do that, on the bottom right-hand corner of the Padlet is a pink like circle with a plus sign. So if you're not familiar with Padlet, you click that and you can post using that feature. So what I was thinking is if I could get everyone to just play around with this a little bit, you don't have to include your name if you don't want. What I've included is my subject area and grade level, my current one. And then if you want to include a sentence or two very quickly in the body, maybe describe a way that you use discussion in your classroom. It could be in person, online, both. Just envision one thing that maybe you do and post that, including maybe whether it is in person, online, or both. So maybe take a moment and try that out, see what it's like. And if you're at the end of a long work day and you're tired and your brain isn't functioning, I totally understand. So feel free to hold off. So as people post, you'll start seeing them pop up. You'll notice that I enabled on my teacher end the heart feature. You can do, I think there's a star rating feature, but I always feel like that's so judgy. So I'm like, I'm going to stay away from giving students the power to give people 1 star or 5. And so I usually enable the heart and then the commenting feature as well. So you can comment on each other's. Ooh, I also love visible thinking. So you'll start to see the way I've set it up almost reads like a social media feed, right? You've probably played with Padlet in a various amount of ways, but they have different options for how you can set it up. So depending on my purpose, Sometimes I'll just have it kind of read like this. And so as you're still posting, as you're getting the experience of what it's like as a student, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the process that I take students through as we're doing that. So to achieve my equity goal, it's not enough just to get students to post online somewhere. So I take them through this process where they post an initial response that's draft in nature. So I let them know, like, this is just your initial thinking. It's not pressure for it to be perfect. Obviously, it's hard when other people are seeing it, right? But it's a little different than unmuting and like making your voice heard. It's a little bit like easier access point. And knowing that it will evolve into something more over time. So based on that, they will then kind of walk through the activity of listening to the thoughts of and ideas and perspectives of others. I take them through a moment where they think about their own thinking. Now that I've heard what other people have to say, here's what I think now, before they go and they revise and they kind of produce a more final type of response. And so I do that through an activity called Stronger and Clearer Each Time. This activity is actually, I want to say, it comes from the illustrative math community. I found it through a math colleague. And so I will link that at the very end if you're interested in the math version of this. And so the idea with Stronger and Clearer is that it's a discussion protocol that supports students in revising and refining their thinking through interactions that guide them into listening and speaking. So different types of input that get you to hear and see different things, and maybe it might, change the way you think or say something. And so my goal is to, Brian, make student thinking visible to both teacher, myself, and to fellow students without requiring them to necessarily unmute and talk. So this is what it looks like, the graphic organizer. And I have links later for you if you're interested. If you notice, the left-hand side of the graphic organizer is private in nature. And so what happens on the left side is something that a student will see for themselves, and they're working through their own thinking and ideas. The right side is more public. And so they move from this initial response in the gray box, where they, write their own idea before they post the Padlet. They shift over to the right as they're looking at other people's ideas. And so after drafting that initial response, we spend some time just reading through the ideas of others before selecting two that we want to record on the graphic organizer. Sometimes I guide what each round is looking for. So in the classroom last week, we did this. And in the first round, I asked them to think about content. So they were looking for someone who had a novel idea they hadn't thought of. For the second round, they were looking at syntax and language. So did someone say something in a way that you're like, wow, that was, I like that. I want to record that. I might try that out. And so sometimes I guide it, sometimes I don't. Once they've been through those two rounds of interaction, they return to their own thinking, and they get an opportunity to kind of solidify what it is that they were doing. And so as a result of that, this is kind of an example of what it might look like. This is what we did last year after Amanda Gorman recited her amazing poem. And we spent time thinking about what made it powerful, what details did she include. I think this example is interesting because this student who posts initially is interpreting the line about quiet isn't always peace, as in COVID, right? Like and of course that is part of our context right now. Like we're all surrounded by this, we're in quarantine. But I love that the student down below, and I'll include my sentence frames for responding to others as well, but acknowledges that point, yet wonders about other factors like voices of people not being heard, especially through BLM and such, like, things like that. And so it's interesting seeing how just reading other people's ideas helps them refine their thinking, but also replying provides an additional layer of like kind of pushing their thinking outside of maybe what they've, personally experienced or were thinking about as they interpreted the text. So as I was kind of going through this process, obviously barriers arise, as we all find with any tech use. And so I think the idea of a shared public space is always a little bit tricky, right? It's difficult to honor privacy. I am asking all students to post, right? And so I do offer that option of anonymity on this particular platform. Students just need to reach out to me and let me know, like, here's my contribution, to let me know where they are kind of on the board. But if they don't want to kind of, associate their name with an idea, then they can kind of opt out. I found that clarity of response was a little tricky. So in live discussion, sometimes we feel the need to explain ourselves, right? We add on naturally. When people kind of look at us like, huh, what do you mean by that? When we are in like the Google chat, like I said, I found that the responses were very short. Here they were longer, but students didn't always feel the need to clarify or add on to deepen their idea like they might in a live discussion. And so I did feel that those peer replies did help to push the thinking if the student went back to their original post and looked at it. Listening and speaking needs, it seemed like, so I spent 10 years at Mar Vista High School, where I had a huge English language learner population, and I spent a lot of time thinking about supporting the development of language. Here at Otay, we don't have a very big English learner population, so it's a very different group that I'm working with. So I will acknowledge that I don't think that this approach meets all the listening and speaking needs of my English learners. I do know that they need to verbally engage, and I know that they need to hear the ideas of others. And so maybe an option would be something like Flipgrid, or now that we're back in person, an option could be to add on some kind of speaking or listening as a result of this moment. So just kind of thinking through like, what barriers pop up, and how do we kind of work through those? This is an example of a student outcome. Like academically, this is kind of what one looked like as a result of that process. This is a student who had an IEP who did struggle with expanding on ideas. So I was really pleased to see how the input helped her develop her thinking. Students, when I surveyed them afterwards, said that they appreciated being able to see the way others compose their idea. They specifically commented on structure and language use being beneficial to their learning. And so I do see that initially she had the quote at the top and then commented on it, whereas down below she pulls the quote into parts and breaks it down and discusses it in a different way. So it was kind of interesting noticing, how did they pick ideas? Like this is an idea that helped her deepen her thinking, and this was a new idea she hadn't considered before as a way of input. And then I thought what was even more interesting is that as much as they said they learned academically, they actually had more comments about kind of the social or the interaction takeaway than anything else. And so when I asked them about what they learned, a lot of comments about getting a glimpse into the experience or mind of others was what popped up as part of their responses. I learned that everyone has different views on certain things. It's important to hear them out and understand what they have to say, even if you don't agree. Right? So just hearing the ideas of others was really significant, it seemed like, as a result. And so I feel like some of my takeaways as I'm thinking about moving forward would definitely be along the lines of, this definitely helped me center student voice. Oftentimes when we're in the classroom, I find myself kind of being the center of it, right? Students, even when they're answering and they're talking whole class, look at me as kind of the confirmer or the, this allowed them to be on stage, just them, without me. I had high participation. I really don't think I had students opt out, maybe one or two. It offered very easy entry point for sharing. It felt social media-like, and so I think they just kind of got on and they were willing. And I did really find that listening increased significantly. And I'm noticing this even as we're back in the classroom, when we share out or we share in partners, they kind of humor me and they talk to each other, but I don't know that they listened as deeply as they do when they're on this Padlet and they're looking at each other's ideas and really thinking about them. I found that the simultaneous interaction was fantastic. The posts popped up and they just were going, like everyone was doing it at once and not just, one person unmuting. And something I hadn't considered when I started this all, and has become really important now that we're back live and kids are out for a variety of reasons all the time right now. Every voice was heard, captured, and left visible. It was like a living record of our discussion, which oftentimes if you miss the class discussion, it's not really recreated, right? There's no place where it lives. And so what was kind of neat was I did find students told me they returned to the Padlet to go back to ideas, to build or to remember something that someone said. So I thought that was kind of a neat takeaway as well. So when I returned to my original equity question of, creating the space for students not just to be heard, but to also listen openly, I did find that the Padlet created that opportunity for them to carefully listen, and like more intentionally, even so than they, like I said, they might do in person. However, when I try to think critically, I'm thinking back to Kim's question about like, okay, let's be critical about how we're using this tech. Is it really better than like being live in person? Like we all want that interaction, right? Like still, I didn't really think, it wasn't the tech that was responsible for the outcomes, right? It was the process that I took students through that got them to notice each other's ideas and listen. It gave them the opportunity to exert their literary presence. And I think that is really kind of my big aha, is that yes, the tech helped facilitate it, but it took what I did with it also to make that kind of outcome really happen. And so kind of my bigger findings were that I think creating space for students to listen intentionally is important. It's not something we're all very well practiced at. And so drawing attention to it and making the time for it is important. It helps them recognize the literary presence of others. And then asking students to think about their own thinking, right? Like, what did that person say? How does it sit with my own ideas? And would I change anything? Or am I going to keep my own, way of saying it or doing it, is important. So that definitely fostered that open-mindedness and flexibility I was talking about before. So as I shift into in-person learning, I was thinking about, okay, well, what would I keep, right? Like, what do we stick with? What do we do on pen and paper? Because I think we're all just needing that like physical, like, touching the actual stuff. I definitely would stick, I think, with the Padlet for the listening moment, right? Like, I really like that idea of giving them kind of a moment to quietly just look and sit with someone else's idea. I found that in terms of accessibility, Padlet was fantastic as that living record. And now that I have so many students at home or out or on independent study and all those things in this very fluid situation we're in, it's really great to have it, to be able to post so that they can still interact and be part of it. And then, like I said, it also reduced that pressure. It was an easy entry point. I had, like I said, I really don't think I had that many students opt out. And so that making it, their thinking visible and giving them models, not just my own models, but each other's models, was really fantastic. So considerations going forward, I think with my ELs, because I do have a few, I definitely think that building in moments either before or after the Padlet for verbal articulation is really important. I think that that's a step that I'm taking this year. And we all want to talk to each other. Like, that's something that we all need. And as I mentioned, the next one, that tech overload is a bit much. We're all feeling it. And so I definitely want to limit, and I've tried this out in my classroom since we've been back. The tech is for the posting and the replying only. I'm printing out the physical hard copy. We're holding the paper of our own thinking and our words and capturing others. That's something, that metacognition and that revision happens on paper. And the tech helps us facilitate the kind of the interaction that happens. And then one last thing that I kind of like personally for me in my own classroom, what I'm hoping to see is definitely deeper response levels is what I'm hoping to see over time. So not just selecting your friends to look at and comment on, which is always nice, but also, seeing what else is out there and around you in the classroom, maybe looking for people who might challenge your thinking, things like that. So I was thinking about ways that I could maybe chart their discussions and offer them feedback, kind of like a visual offering. I do it with Socratic seminars where I track what, the conversation does. And they always they find it very interesting to see oh, most of us agreed with each other. It was all very one-way nodding, that kind of thing. And so I think I could find a way to chart how the discussion goes and offer them some feedback to develop that discourse community a little bit more deeply. That's where I'm headed. So I know that was a lot. There's a lot of information coming at you all at the same time. But what I'd like to create time for is a moment for you to kind of think about what does this make you think about in regard to structuring discussion in your classroom, whatever your your version of classroom looks like this year. I think most of us are back. And then as a follow-up to that, what does it make you wonder about using tech smartly in an equitable way in your own space? So I kind of want to give you a moment to think about that and be quiet for a second. And then I think like we did last week, we might, as you're coming up with some responses to these questions, maybe we post a little bit into the chat, we ask questions or make comments that would respond to these ideas. So I'll give you a moment to kind of process for a second. And as you're ready, go ahead and post in the chat if you want to.
So Courtney invited, this is Mica, invited Kim and me to maybe start with a couple of reactions to get things going in our last 20 minutes or so as we engage folks. And I think one aha that Courtney, your thoughtful pro and con analysis has given me is to move beyond I think the easiest version of what we might think equitable invitation of student voices or equitable student voice, which is just more like everybody just talking. I think that often when I'm teaching, you know, that the anxiety is some people are doing all the talking and I need to get everybody talking. And so I think some of, you know, participation, getting everybody into the conversation is part of what you were learning, showing us how to facilitate. But there were some other things I noticed that I thought were much deeper versions of what equitable student voice involves that I was picking up while you were talking. You know, that sort of everybody chatting a one-word answer is not like necessarily inviting equitable student voice, that we're going for some kind of, maybe that's belonging, I don't know, but the quest for making a mark for deep thinking was the other part of equity that you were going for. And so this quest for deeper thinking along with belonging was really stuck out to me. That your points on participating almost safely seemed like an equity aha to me, that some anonymity might be helpful, being able to participate without sticking your name on everything you say, not necessarily requiring people to talk and unmute. And then your structuring of the aspect of equity, equitable voice that has to do with people recognizing and building on one another's ideas and making their thinking deeper really is sticking with me. And to me, your quest for collective talking rather than just individuals saying something and everybody moving on, but people, your protocols and the structuring of collective talking, those to me were all versions of equitable student voice that went beyond just more. So I really appreciated those kinds of ahas from you today.
Yeah, it's been my mission the last couple of years to create this vision of what I have as like a discourse community. And that can't happen if there's people who don't feel they're a part of it, right? Like that don't feel that they have a space to insert themselves into it. But I don't want it just to be like you said, the sharing of an idea and that's it. That's where we stop. It's like a building. Like I believe that we can collectively get to a place higher or better or deeper than we were individually. And so I think that that's where some of that comes from. And last year, it was my first year co-teaching. And I just really found myself thinking a lot about the variety of ways that students can show their learning. And that doesn't always look the same, right? Like it doesn't always have to be unmute and speak, because that is not everyone's forte, even though I guess listening and speaking are standards in English, like Common Core. So it is important at some point, but does that need to be raising your hand in front of the whole class or unmuting in front of the whole group? Not necessarily, right? And so really trying to think outside of that is maybe what drove, I think, some of what you're commenting on.
How about Denise's question in the chat here? Maybe before, Kim, you take it with some of your reactions. That it was, what are your thoughts about it? Not the tech tool, but the process. Denise, you want to share anything else in what you said here? Or you think your chat point makes the point?
No, I guess I think it does make the point, but I am curious. I was really interested in what you had to say, Courtney, on your aha and your reflection that it wasn't Padlet or the tech tool, but it was more like guiding through the students through the process. And I hadn't thought about it in that way, because I do know I also teach ELs. And it is just like you said, like very difficult. I'm not back face to face, but in a face to face classroom, despite 26 years of experience, it is hard to get a whole class discussion going where everyone is equitably speaking. Whereas on the Padlet and other tech tools, I see and hear every student's voice, and students sometimes take a lot longer to process and speak out. And that's where technology for me has given that space. But yeah, talk a little bit more about that, because I just found that super interesting from your perspective.
Yeah, I think the process and finding the time to do all the things is a little tricky. But there are two moments where I build in opportunity for metacognitive reflection. So after they record a person's idea, after they've taken it and kind of put it down on their paper, which they often do in a very like, okay, she told me to write it down on the paper, I'm going to, like do that kind of way. But then when I ask them to stop and think like, okay, now how did that person's idea or the way they said it sit with your own? Did it challenge it? Did it agree with it, but give you more? How like indicate where that idea sat with your own thinking. That kind of starts to push it a little bit deeper. And then at the very end, and I include this link to my Google form in the resources at the end of my slides. But at the very end, I have them go through a Google form kind of metacognitive reflection process where they think through like what they learned or what role did they play and how did they take from others? What did they gain from others? And I think they're unfamiliar with that process. Like whenever I ask them to do it initially, it's awkward and they're a little bit kind of like, you want me to think about what? Like how I thought? And so, but they pick it up quickly. And I think I don't know, I get a lot of information about how their learning occurs that way. And I've started expanding that into other aspects of my teaching as well, like my writing and how I ask them to give me a writer's memo ahead of their pieces of writing now. Any place where I can get them to express to me how their learning has grown, I think has been helpful. And when they take those moments to do that, it deepens how they look at what they did, right? Then they're a little bit more engaged in like, oh, why am I on the Padlet? Like, how am I looking at other people's ideas? I think that really, I don't know, that metacognitive reflection piece is really important, I think, in that process. Did that answer your question, Denise? Did that kind of speak to what you're talking about?
Absolutely. And I can't wait to see that form. I just love how you really dive deeper and really get your students to dig deeper as well. I love that.
I agree. And I was going to jump right on, like, I think maybe I'm between Mica's comment and Denise's comment in some way. I was really struck with the facility of Padlet, but also with the structure of having students do some private reflection and writing for themselves before they move to this more public space. And the power of that as a tool for thinking, and also the valuing of listening. And even if the listening is actually not with your ears, but with your eyes, right? that listening to what your peers have to say and the valuing of it. I mean, I think often our students get a message that like it needs to be your own original ideas, right? Don't take any ideas from anybody else, which I feel like is a close our ears kind of system. And yet you talked about the durability, I guess, for lack of a better word, of Padlet that you can go back to and go back to and go back to, which I think is another way of honoring that idea of listening to somebody else's ideas and then bumping them up against your own as a way of deepening your understanding, your thinking, pushing back, lots of different ways of going about it.
Yeah, I think about the way you described oftentimes how students need to produce that individual piece, right? And I do think the individual accountability is important at some point, right, in the process. But it's very competitive in nature. And I guess that's not the message I'm trying to send to my students. I'm trying to get them to realize, like, we're all in this space together. And wouldn't it be cool if we made something deeper and more as a result of that, instead of just like, what can you produce? Now, what can you produce? You know, like, and sometimes that happens through me, like taking a student's work and modeling, you know, showing it in front of the dot cam or whatever it is. But I think this idea of like building takes away, they start to realize like, okay, so she's not calling me out, or she's not looking at me to like produce the best thing initially, or, you know, right away. I can build, I can refine, I can go back and revise or make it better based on what I hear. And so, again, it takes them a while to get what I want, because it's not, I don't think it's the norm, or it's not what they've experienced previously. But once they start to understand what I'm after, the interactions become more meaningful, I find. So that, I don't know, that does make me wonder, now that we're in person, how can I use maybe this process to then work with, alongside, before or after, like, you know, live verbal discussion? Like, how does it work together or layered together is kind of an interesting question. Our students are out of practice, just like we are as teachers, right? And so anytime I ask them to do any kind of verbal interaction right now, it's a little stilted, it's a little awkward. They're out of practice, you know, academically interacting with one another. So I'm finding that this is a little bit a baby step. It's helpful right now.
Hey, Courtney, this is Janice. And I was just sitting here thinking about your point of having students, you know, be able to enter in however they can and comfortably. But I even more see how you've done some shifting just internally, you know, with what you want for students and how you want them to engage. And that's unique. And that's where, as teachers, we have to go with our teaching at this point, allowing students to talk and represent themselves and be creative and have different ways to express themselves. And I like how your structure, as Kim said, has helped to foster that. And you're not done yet. You know, you're like, I'm really trying to figure this out. And
what else?
And want to, and, you know, because we're all having to do some shifting, probably even more if we don't get this thing under control. But I think the learning that you did and you're sharing with us is valuable, because we're thinking outside the box. We're allowing students to participate and express themselves, and to even evaluate how they're expressing themselves. You know, is not really what you want, but is this really true to me, to my core of who I am? Am I sharing that freely?
Yeah, and
So
I think, you know, I think, Janice, you made an important point. Last year, we all had to be very flexible, right? And flexible in so many different ways. And I think that that's part of what drove this, is I realized when we're normally in the classroom, there's so many moments of informal feedback that students get along the way, right? Like, there's sometimes a question someone poses just casually that happens to be nearby, and I respond and I give an example, or, you know, as I'm walking around the classroom, I see someone's work and I put it up in front of other people so they can see an example of what it looks like. You know, like, there's just so many little moments that informally we offer feedback. And I was feeling like last year, those weren't there as much, right? Like, it was just like, okay, you're on your computer, do this assignment, or, you know, and there wasn't that opportunity for all of those kind of like other sensory kind of things. And so I was just trying to think of ways that they could see each other's thinking, like I said, along with mine and my modeling and everything I do, but how can they be exposed to each other's as well? I think pushed me a little bit in that way as well.
Do others in the room, so to speak, have questions for Courtney? Kim and I always have more questions, so we want to make space.
I don't have a question. Is it okay just to share a response or a thought?
Absolutely.
First of all, I just want to say I'm so thankful for this group and this time. I don't know any of you, and I feel this feels like a graduate course that we've been in for a long time. So just thank you for creating the space and the way that you did. There's so many great things I'm thinking about, and I'm chewing on Mica's question in the chat. And I think, you talked about one of your goals, I think you said at the beginning, was you wanted to decenter the teacher in this activity. And I think you've done that beautifully. And I also think you've decentered certain kind of student participation, right? So somebody said democratizing the process. And I think that's another aspect of this that's so beautiful, is that so often in verbal conversations or classroom conversations, certain students' voices get centered there, or certain ways of thinking get centered in those whole group conversations. And so this is an opportunity, right, for everybody to participate, and not just, I think, again, you've already said this, but not just give simple one-word answers, or even just answer and be done, even if it wasn't a one-word answer. This is like, I answer or I express my thought, and now I need to think more about what I said and my thinking, and then deepen or change or alter my thought and my response again. And so I think that that creates such an important space for students to not check out. How easy is it for students to check out if they're not participating, or they give their answer and I'm done? I'm not checking out, I'm continuing my thinking and learning, which I think is so important. And then just the last thing is just, I think it models real life experience with collaboration, where oftentimes I'm, thinking about ideas and talking with colleagues about our work, and it's this exchange of ideas and, well, yeah, but, or no, I love how I think it's real world, as well as all those things tied in. It's just, just lots of great things I'm thinking about, how we can use activities like this with students. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your comment. Prior to my placement at Otay the last couple of years, I was an induction mentor for 4 years out of the classroom, and I got to see tons of classrooms. I did lots of observations, and mostly English. And so one of the kind of big takeaways was like, oh, that's so interesting. Like when you're in it and you're teaching it, sometimes it's hard to see. But when you stop and you're observing for someone else, or you're note taking about like whose voice is, centered in those discussions, it was like, oh, it's some people are faster than others, right? Or some people are a little bit louder or a little bit more assertive, does that mean those are the only people in the room that have thoughts and, something to say? No, not necessarily. And so in my quest to give that feedback to new teachers, right, it kind of made me think like, okay, so how would I do it? Like, how do you create the space where, someone who's a little bit slower to process or think or construct a response has a space to share and be part of it as well. So yeah, no, that was useful. Thank you so much. Mica? Oh, I can share my, before, these are my slides in the chat. If you are interested in taking a look, at the very end, I have a bunch of resources that I've referred to or, talked about. And all of us, as we were completing this process, completed this note-taking guide to kind of get us through like this idea of like, what is our equity vision? What do we want to try out? How are we going to accomplish that? And note-taking on the process as it went. So if you're interested in trying that out as well, this is a blank version of that note-taking guide. And I've included my note-taking guide as well as a resource at the very end. Is there anything else, Mica, that?
Well, one thing that we would like to invite you, not sure if everybody was here last week or if there's somebody new this week, we're inviting people to join a conversation space on Right Now Teacher Studio. And maybe Angela can put a link to that in the chat. Oh, there we go. There's the spaces there. We can continue the conversation. And so feel free to join that group. And we'll be putting some questions in there. We'll be putting some ideas in there, and feel free to add your own ideas and resources so we can continue this conversation beyond just today.
Absolutely. And really what I think, Courtney, you've modeled so beautifully is the basic process of equity design that we're just trying to forward with this series, including, putting this online after the fact, is the really deep questioning of whether what we're doing with tech or with any action in our classrooms or schools reaches these deeper equity goals. And I think I'm still sitting with, Courtney, I don't know if you have a last thing to say about it, but your original point about your school's WASP goal of the culture of belonging and the specific goals you mentioned for several subgroups who are experiencing sort of a lack of belonging in school, Black students, students labeled with disabilities. And I'm wondering, what I'm sitting with is, are all of the strategies you've been exploring today for deep dialogue the same thing as creating a culture of belonging? Like, are those just the same thing, or are they different? Do you have any more ahas about that, creating the culture of belonging goal?
That's an interesting question. It might be. I wonder, Mica, like, this idea of belonging means that maybe you have a space to be seen and heard. It means that maybe others respond and acknowledge that. And then also that you're considering the ideas and being of others as well. I think that speaks to belonging for sure. I don't know.
There's something, a word we haven't used yet today. A place where your literary acts or your voice is valued. Kim just put in the chat. I was going to use the word respect. I think what you're also showing is our structures and techniques for students respecting one another's voices and also respecting their own abilities to deepen their thinking. And that kind of respect for one another and self, I feel like, is somehow very connected to the goal of belonging that you started with. Does anyone have final thoughts on that?
And just saying that multiple contributions, right? That there's not just one thought that is valued, but it is these multiple contributions that are valued and create this belonging to this literary community that you have in your classroom. So you're a human being, and you also bring I don't know, these literary acts forward. I can't think of a better word to use at this moment
At
the end of a long school day. But, that the valuing and the respecting and the having space for a variety, I think is huge.
Yeah, I think just as a last comment, at the very end, there's some resources. One of them is my guide to posting productive online comments that I gave to students. And I think that was modeled in the example from the Padlet that I showed, where a student read the other person's writing, realized that she was kind of missing like a major issue in society. Like, yes, COVID is important, but also like what's happening with Black lives right now, and like what, is what she wanted to include as well. And so she found a way to engage that, I guess you could say academically or respectfully, right? Like, she acknowledged what the other person contributed and offered something more as well that could maybe deepen that thinking. So yeah, I think that's definitely a part of what I was trying to accomplish. So
beautiful. Acknowledging what others have to offer and then contributing something more to take it deeper. I think it's a great way to end on what your equity vision was trying to go for. We're going to invite everybody back we're going to skip a week because Rosh Hashanah is next week on our Tech Tuesday, I believe. And then we are going to convene again on the 14th with Denise talking about another angle on sparking student voice. So we are really excited that you joined us. We will be putting this recording online for folks to learn from and take their own thinking deeper. And Courtney, we're so grateful to you for sharing your pro-con thinking in action with us today. So thanks everybody for coming to this session on Smart Techies for Equity. We will see you next time. Thanks, folks.